Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. If these stories help you unwind, you can follow and subscribe to hear the newest episode each week on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and share SleepWise with someone you care about. Tonight, we drift into a kind of protection most people never see but rely on all day long. It is the quiet guardianship that keeps a plane's route steady, a hospital's lights on, a bank transfer honest, and a message to a friend arriving where it was meant to go. Cybersecurity sounds sharp, like a word made of metal, yet in practice it is often gentle, patient, and routine. It is the nightly habit of locking doors you don't think about, checking windows you will never open, and keeping a small lamp lit in the hallway just in case. Because the world we live in now is stitched together with invisible threads. A tap on glass becomes a purchase, a boarding pass, a paycheck, a medical record, a container moving through a port, a traffic light turning green at the right moment. So much of it happens without ceremony, and that is exactly why it can feel taken for granted. Not because it is unimportant, but because it is designed to disappear into normal life. And yet, behind that normal life, there is a steady question, asked again and again in countless quiet rooms. Who is allowed in? What is allowed to change? And whether the system keeps breathing even when something tries to interrupt it. In the simplest sense, that is what cybersecurity protects. It protects privacy, which is the right for certain things to remain yours. It protects integrity, which is the calm certainty that what you see has not been secretly altered. And it protects availability, which is the ability for the lights to stay on, the calls to connect, the care to continue, and the everyday to remain ordinary. Tonight, we will move slowly through the hidden history of these protections. We will visit a few moments when the world felt that invisible thread tug hard, and people suddenly noticed what had been quietly holding everything together. And as we do, we will keep returning to the softer truth underneath it all. That safety, in the modern age, is often made of small, repeated choices. Updates applied on a Tuesday afternoon. Backups running while the office sleeps. Passwords turned into longer phrases like little poems. And patient teams watching the digital horizon the way lighthouse keepers once watched the sea. For now, let your shoulders loosen. Let the room you are in become the most important network of all, warm and still and close at hand. And as we begin, imagine the world outside continuing to hum, protected by calm attention while you are free to rest. When we say cybersecurity, we are really naming a kind of care. It is the care that keeps a message from being read by the wrong eyes, keeps a number from being changed in the wrong place, and keeps a system from going quiet when it is needed most. In the language of engineers, there are tidy words for this, but tonight we can hold them like three smooth stones in the palm. Privacy is the first stone. It is the simple idea that some things belong only to you. Your photos, your notes, your location, your medical history, the small trails your day leaves behind. The second stone is integrity. Integrity is the comfort of knowing that what arrives is what was sent, that what is recorded is what truly happened, that a digit has not been nudged, and a sentence has not been rewritten while no one was looking. And the third stone is availability. Availability is the quiet expectation that the service will still be there when you reach for it. The emergency line, the payment network, the navigation signal, the hospital system, the power station's controls. Most nights, these three stones sit unnoticed. They are like the foundation under a house you've lived in for years, strong enough that you rarely think about it until something makes the floor creak. And the strange thing about the digital world is that it is everywhere and nowhere at once. A photo might live on a device in your hand, then echo to a server in another country, then be copied again to keep it safe, and again to make it quick, and again to make it shareable. A bank transfer might pass through several trusted systems, each one handing it forward, each one checking it briefly, like a relay pass between calm, practiced hands. So cybersecurity is not one lock on one door. It is a whole neighborhood of doors, some new, some old, some made by different builders, each with its own habits and weak spots. And because people are people, we forget. We reuse passwords the way we reuse familiar phrases. We click quickly when we're tired. We install one more app because it promises to save time. In this way, the weak point is rarely a villain in a hoodie. It is usually an ordinary moment, a hurried morning, an overlooked update, a shared spreadsheet, a device left unpatched because everything seemed fine yesterday. Tonight, as we begin our journey, let it be soothing to remember this. The work of security is not a single dramatic battle. It is the steady craft of making ordinary moments safer, and then safer again, until safety becomes part of the background, like the gentle hum of electricity behind the walls. Long before the internet felt like a crowded city, it was more like a quiet university hallway. A small number of computers spoke to each other, mostly in trusted places, and the people using them often knew one another, at least by name. In those early days, the spirit of the network was open. Sharing was the point. A password was sometimes a formality, and a program arriving from elsewhere was often greeted like a letter from a colleague, assumed to be friendly, assumed to be safe. Even the idea of secrecy was different then. If you wanted privacy, you might simply not publish something, or you might keep it on a machine that never left the room. The locks were physical, not mathematical, and the hallways had fewer strangers. Then, slowly, the hallway opened into a street, and the street became a town, and the town became a world. With every new connection came new convenience, and also a new surface where something could go wrong. One of the earliest lessons was simple. If you can send instructions to a machine, you can also send mischief. In the late 1980s, a program known as the Morris worm slipped into the young Internet and spread wider than intended, slowing machines and surprising a community that had not yet learned to distrust its own pathways. It was not a cinematic moment, not explosions or flashing lights, but it was a wakeful kind of surprise. The feeling of realizing that a door you thought was internal actually opened outward. From there, the story begins to repeat in different costumes. Viruses arrived on floppy disks, riding between offices and classrooms like hitchhikers. Later, email became a new road, and attachments became little parcels that could carry either gifts or trouble. And with the rise of the web, the simplest human instincts were pulled gently into the digital world. Curiosity, urgency, distraction, the hope that something is free, the fear that something has been missed. Defenders responded the way good caretakers always do. They learned to sweep the floors more often. They learned to keep lists of what belonged and what did not. They learned to patch cracks as soon as they were found and to build new doors with better hinges. And a whole quiet profession emerged. People who think in questions. What could an attacker see from here? What could they change from there? If this part failed, would the rest still stand? For now, just let that early hallway settle in your imagination. A few soft footsteps, a few blinking screens, a sense of trust that was natural, almost innocent, and the slow understanding over time that trust needs gentle protection to remain trust at all. As the years passed, the Internet stopped being a separate place. It became the wiring inside everything. Factories used connected systems to measure temperature and pressure. Power stations used connected systems to balance supply and demand. Hospitals used connected systems to schedule care, track medicine, and keep records consistent across busy halls. And somewhere in that steady expansion, a new kind of realization formed. If computers could help run the physical world, then software could also disturb it. Around 2010, news began to circulate about a piece of malicious code, later known as Stuxnet. It was unusual not because it stole a password or emptied an account, but because it was designed to interfere with industrial equipment, the kind of machines that spin and pump and regulate and keep physical processes stable. It moved quietly, with patience, looking for very specific conditions, like a key cut for a single lock. And it reminded governments, engineers, and ordinary people of something that still matters today. The digital world is not just a layer of information. It is also a layer of control. This is where a gentle bedtime story can hold two truths at once. One truth is comforting. Automation makes life safer and smoother. It prevents human error, catches tiny fluctuations, and keeps complex systems balanced while we focus on living. The other truth is sobering, but we can hold it softly. When control systems are connected, they must be defended with the same seriousness as the physical machines they guide. From this era onward, the phrase critical infrastructure begins to glow more clearly in the mind. It means the systems we rarely praise because their best work is invisible. Water that arrives clean, power that arrives steady, signals that guide ships through dark harbors and planes through cloud. And it also means that cybersecurity is no longer only about privacy or money. It is also about continuity, about keeping the world's quiet routines from being interrupted. So defenders began to think in layers, not just firewalls and passwords, but segmentation, separating parts of a network the way a ship is built with compartments, so one leak does not sink the whole vessel. Not just alarms, but monitoring, watching for small changes in behavior, the way a gardener notices when a plant's leaves turn slightly and knows something is off before it becomes a crisis. And not just prevention, but recovery, backups, rehearsals, and plans, so that if something slips through, the lights can return gently and the system can breathe again. Let these ideas settle like slow waves. Layers, compartments, recovery. The world does not become safe through a single perfect lock. It becomes safer through calm design, repeated care, and a willingness to prepare for storms without living in fear of them. By the time we reach the 2010s, the digital neighborhood has become enormous. Each home has a router, each pocket has a phone, each office has cloud accounts and shared documents and tiny devices that quietly report their status to somewhere far away. And this is the part people often miss. Security is not only about protecting a single computer. It is about protecting the connections between many computers. Connections that change every day as we add apps, hire vendors, travel, click links, and connect to new networks without thinking twice. In cybersecurity, there is a plain phrase for this: the attack surface. It simply means all the places a system can be touched. All the doors, all the windows, all the vents, all the forgotten spare keys. And as modern life became more convenient, the number of doors multiplied. A hospital might have thousands of machines that need updates, from laptops at the nurse's station to scanners in the imaging room. A shipping company might rely on software that schedules containers, handles payments, and tracks vessels across oceans. A city might run traffic lights, meters, and maintenance systems through networks built over decades, with old parts and new parts living side by side. This is not a sign that anyone failed. It is a sign that the world grew quickly, and growth, when it happens fast, always leaves a few loose boards, a few unlabeled chords, a few rules that were written for yesterday. So, attackers began to specialize. Some hunted for money. Some hunted for information. Some hunted for disruption or influence or advantage. And as defenses improved, attackers learned to aim not at the strongest wall, but at the softer edge. The third-party supplier, the forgotten server, the employee who is tired and trying to finish one last task. If this sounds tense, let it soften, because the same era also brought a quiet maturing. Organizations learned to update more quickly. Browsers learned to warn us. Phones learned to encrypt by default. And everyday people learned small habits that matter. Two-factor codes, password managers, backups that run while you sleep. Still, every so often, a single event arrives that makes the invisible visible. A moment when the whole world seems to notice the same quiet tug on the thread. And one such moment came in 2017 when a piece of ransomware began to spread with startling speed, reaching systems that were never meant to be part of any drama at all. In a moment, we will step into that night gently and watch what happened, not to frighten you, but to understand how the world learned and how the guardians grew steadier afterward. To understand why WannaCry moves so widely, you do not need to imagine a mastermind watching every step. It was less like a burglar picking locks one by one and more like a spark that learned how to jump. The ransomware used a flaw in common Windows systems, and once it found one machine that had not been updated, it could try its luck with the next, and the next, and the next, sometimes without a human hand guiding each attempt. This is what makes some cyber incidents feel uncanny. They do not travel at the speed of a person. They travel at the speed of software. In a world where networks are built for convenience, where computers are designed to talk to each other quickly, a fast-moving problem can borrow that same speed. Yet even here, there is a soothing truth. Many of the most effective defenses are not mystical. They are the steady, almost boring habits of maintenance. Applying security patches like sealing tiny cracks before rain arrives. Separating networks so a problem in one room cannot sprint through the whole house. Keeping backups that are not constantly connected, so a lock placed on one cabinet does not lock the entire archive. And practicing recovery, the way a good crew rehearses what to do when the sea changes its mood. After WannaCry, many organizations took inventory with new honesty. They asked quietly what had been forgotten, which systems were old because replacing them was expensive, which machines had been left behind on purpose because they ran one essential piece of equipment, which processes depended on someone remembering, and which depended on a routine that would happen even on a tired day. This is one of the gentle ironies of cybersecurity. The biggest risks often come not from malice alone, but from neglect, complexity, and the simple human tendency to assume that tomorrow will look like yesterday. So defenders began to treat updates not as optional chores, but as part of the heartbeat. They began to treat visibility as a form of safety, building dashboards and alerts that could whisper early when something unusual was happening. And they began to talk about resilience as if it were a kind of calm strength, the ability to be shaken without being broken. Tonight, let that word settle. Resilience. Not perfect protection, but a steady capacity to recover, to restore, and to continue. There is also a softer truth about time. Attackers often move quickly, but defenders improve steadily, and each incident becomes a lesson written into better defaults, better tools, and better training. Over time, the Internet becomes a place where fewer doors are left wide open and more houses remember to lock up before night falls. You do not need to memorize any of this. Just let the feeling remain. Careful upkeep is a kind of kindness. In the months around the same time, another event offered a darker lesson in how far a digital storm can reach. A piece of destructive malware spread through systems in a way that looked, at first glance, like ransomware, but carried a different intention. It came to be known as NotPetya, and its path showed how a problem can begin with a single point of entry and then ripple outward across borders, across industries, across the quiet assumptions of global trade. It moved through a software update mechanism used in Ukraine, and from there it found connected networks and, through them, the wider world. Shipping companies felt it when terminals and booking systems went dark. Manufacturers felt it when production lines paused. Offices felt it when the ordinary tools of coordination, email, documents, scheduling, were suddenly unreliable. And in the middle of it, the strange modern truth became plain. A business can have steel and warehouses and trucks and still be brought to a standstill by missing access to the invisible layer that tells everything where to go. NotPetya is often remembered for its cost, with damage estimates reaching into the billions. But the more bedtime-friendly lesson is simpler. Interdependence is beautiful, and it is also fragile. The global economy is a set of linked hands, passing work from one to another, and when one hand is suddenly gloved in thick fog, the whole chain must slow down. So the practice of cybersecurity widened again. It became not only about defending your own walls, but about understanding the doors you share with others. It became about third parties, suppliers, contractors, and the quiet question of whether the tools you trust are truly what they claim to be. It became about knowing what is essential and designing systems so that the essential can keep running even if the convenient must pause. And it became about learning to restore, not in panic, but with practiced calm. In response, many organizations began to ask for proof, not just promises. They learned to verify software updates, to limit administrative privileges, and to treat trusted connections as things that still deserve inspection. They also learned to keep certain systems simpler, because simplicity can be defended more easily than endless complexity. Tonight, that idea can feel soothing. A simpler room is easier to keep safe, and a simpler mind is easier to let drift toward sleep. By the late 2010s, ransomware had become more than a rare shock. It had become a business model. Groups formed that treated intrusion like a service, offering tools, instructions, and even customer support to help criminals collect payments. And organizations learned that the damage was not only the locked files, it was the downtime, the recovery work, the reputation, the legal obligations, and the uneasy realization that the same incident could happen again if the underlying habits did not change. So, defenses grew more deliberate. Companies began to separate what they call identity from everything else, making it harder for a stolen password to become a master key. They began to require extra proof, codes, confirmations, physical devices, so that access would depend on more than memory alone. They began to encrypt data more widely, so that even if something was taken, it would be harder to read. They began to keep logs like quiet diaries, so that when something strange happened, there would be a trail to follow back through the night. And they began to talk more openly about incident response, as if it were a kind of emergency preparedness. Who do we call first? Which systems do we shut down, and which must stay alive? How do we speak to customers without adding confusion? How do we restore from clean backups? And how do we verify that clean truly means clean? For a moment, it may sound like too much, like a long list for a tired mind. But there is a comforting way to hold it. Most of security is simply the organization of attention. It is making sure the right people notice the right things early. It is keeping the number of surprises small. It is building routines so that when pressure arrives, the response is not invented from scratch. Even the language changed. Instead of keep everything out, teams began to say, assume something will get in, and then design the house so that one intruder cannot reach every room. They called it containment, segmentation, and least privilege, but the meaning is familiar. Give each key a purpose, and do not let any single key open the whole building. In the end, this is how safety feels, not like fear, but like sensible boundaries, drawn with quiet care. Then, in 2021, another incident reminded the public that cybersecurity is not only about private data or office computers. It is also about the systems that move fuel, food, and daily life. A ransomware attack struck Colonial Pipeline, a major fuel pipeline operator in the United States, and the company shut down operations as a precaution. For many people, the first sign was not a headline. It was a change in routine, a rumor at a gas station, a line that seemed longer than usual, a small ripple of uncertainty that traveled faster than the physical fuel could travel. This is one of the quiet powers of cyber disruption. Sometimes the greatest impact is not what happens inside the network, but what happens in the mind outside it. When trust wavers, people rush to prepare, and the rush becomes part of the disruption. The event also carried another lesson, gentle but important. Organizations sometimes choose to pause systems not because they have been physically damaged, but because they do not yet know what has been touched, and caution becomes the safest path. So, the story of cybersecurity is also a story of restraint, of stopping, checking, isolating, and confirming before restarting the flow. And in the years since, the work has continued to mature. Governments have issued guidance and requirements for critical sectors. Companies have invested in better segmentation, better monitoring, and better recovery. And the broader culture has begun slowly to accept that security is part of the cost of being connected, the way brakes are part of the cost of driving. As we continue, we will step into the quieter details of how attacks often begin and why so many of them still rely on simple human moments. A click, a reused password, a trusted email that should have been questioned. And we will also meet the modern counterforce. Not a single hero, but layers of design, layers of verification, and layers of calm attention, keeping the night-lit world steady while you let yourself drift. And so, the modern posture is a balance. We want the benefits of connection, but we also want the right to close certain doors. We want convenience, but we also want verification. We want speed, but we also want pauses that prevent a small mistake from becoming a large one. Tonight, we will keep moving at that slower, safer pace, letting the story show you how the guardians of the Internet think and how the tools of attack and defense are changing again as a new kind of technology. Artificial intelligence joins the night watch. For now, just breathe and let the screen light in your mind dim a little more. Most cyber attacks do not begin with a dramatic burst. They begin with something ordinary. An email that looks familiar, a login page that seems routine, a message that arrives at the end of a long day, when your attention is softer at the edges, and you want to finish one last thing before you rest. This is why cybersecurity at its core is not only a technical field. It is also a human field, because humans are the ones who read, who trust, who hurry, who forget, and who try to be helpful. One of the oldest tricks is simply to ask, to write a message that sounds urgent or friendly or official, and to invite someone to click, to open, to sign in. This is called phishing, and the name is perfect because it is patient. It casts many lines into the water, waiting for a single bite. Sometimes the bait is fear. Your account will be closed. Sometimes it is curiosity. See the attached file. Sometimes it is familiarity. A message that looks like it came from a colleague, a vendor, a manager, a friend. And sometimes it is comfort. A fake login page that looks exactly like the real one, offering you the relief of doing what you always do. In this way, the attack surface is not only devices and servers. It is also moments of life. The coffee break, the crowded airport, the sleepy evening when your eyes skim instead of read. So defenders learn to build protections that are gentle to humans, spam filters that quietly catch the obvious traps, warnings in browsers that nudge you when something looks wrong, two-factor codes that act like a second lock, even if the first key is copied, and training that does not scold, but teaches people to slow down, to glance at the sender, to notice the small differences that reveal a disguise. Tonight, you do not need to become an expert. Just let one idea settle like a soft blanket. The strongest security systems are the ones that assume you are human, and they protect you in the moments when being human means being tired, busy, or kind. There is another quiet weakness that appears again and again, not because people are foolish, but because memory is limited. Passwords. For years, the internet asked us to create secret words for everything. A word for email, a word for banking, a word for shopping, a word for work, a word for that one app we tried once and never used again. And when a person has too many doors to lock, the mind naturally tries to simplify. We choose something memorable. We reuse it. We make small variations, like changing a number at the end. This is not a moral failure. It is the brain seeking efficiency. Attackers understand this, and they also understand another modern reality. Huge lists of stolen passwords exist, gathered from past breaches, traded and shared, tested automatically. This is why credential stuffing works. It is not that one company is uniquely vulnerable. It is that people are consistent, and consistency can be exploited. So the defenders responded with a softer approach. Instead of telling people to memorize endless strings, they encouraged password managers, small vaults that remember for you. Instead of relying on one secret, they added a second step, a code, a confirmation, a device in your pocket. And in some places, they began to move away from passwords entirely, using passkeys and device-based authentication that behaves more like a locked door than a memorized phrase. The deeper lesson is soothing. Security improves when it aligns with human nature rather than fighting it. When the safe path is also the easy path. When the system quietly guides you toward better habits without demanding constant vigilance. So tonight, if you think about passwords at all, let it be like thinking about keys. You do not carry every key in your mind. You keep them organized, you keep them secure, and you let the routine of locking up become a calm part of life. There is another quiet weakness that appears again and again, not because people are foolish, but because memory is limited. Passwords. For years, the internet asked us to create secret words for everything. A word for email, a word for banking, a word for shopping, a word for work, a word for that one app we tried once and never used again. And when a person has too many doors to lock, the mind naturally tries to simplify. We choose something memorable. We reuse it. We make small variations, like changing a number at the end. This is not a moral failure. It is the brain seeking efficiency. Attackers understand this, and they also understand another modern reality. Huge lists of stolen passwords exist, gathered from past breaches, traded and shared, tested automatically. This is why credential stuffing works. It is not that one company is uniquely vulnerable. It is that people are consistent, and consistency can be exploited. So the defenders responded with a softer approach. Instead of telling people to memorize endless strings, they encouraged password managers, small vaults that remember for you. Instead of relying on one secret, they added a second step, a code, a confirmation, a device in your pocket. And in some places, they began to move away from passwords entirely, using passkeys and device-based authentication that behaves more like a locked door than a memorized phrase. The deeper lesson is soothing. Security improves when it aligns with human nature rather than fighting it. When the safe path is also the easy path. When the system quietly guides you toward better habits without demanding constant vigilance. So tonight, if you think about passwords at all, let it be like thinking about keys. You do not carry every key in your mind. You keep them organized, you keep them secure, and you let the routine of locking up become a calm part of life. As cybersecurity matured, another shift became clear. The greatest risks were not only the attacks you could see, they were also the ones you could not see yet. The quiet presence inside a network, waiting. This is where we meet a concept that sounds suspicious, but is actually very calming when understood. Zero trust. It does not mean distrust as a personality. It means verification as a design. It means you do not assume something is safe simply because it is inside the building. You verify access every step, you limit what each account can do, and you watch for behavior that does not fit the usual pattern. Imagine a hotel at night. Guests can enter the lobby, but they still need a key card for the elevator and a second confirmation for certain doors, and staff who notice when someone walks the halls in a way that does not match belonging. This is how zero trust feels in practice. Quiet checks, small gates, clear boundaries, and alongside it lives another idea: least privilege. You do not give every person the master key. You give each role the smallest set of permissions needed to do their work, nothing more. This can sound restrictive, but it is really a form of safety. If one key is lost, it cannot open every door. If one account is compromised, it cannot reach the entire system. So, modern cybersecurity became a craft of containment, not just preventing every intrusion, because no system is perfect, but designing the world so that intrusions stay small, like a ship built with watertight compartments, like a forest with fire breaks, like a city with doors that close gently when an alarm whispers, not when a siren screams. And as these designs spread, they began to shape the way companies and governments thought about their most important systems. Identify the crown jewels, protect them with extra layers, keep backups, test recovery, and always keep a record of what happened so the story can be reconstructed if something goes wrong. You do not need to hold the details. Just keep the feeling. Boundaries are calming. Verification is comforting. And good design turns anxiety into routine. Then came a lesson that felt almost unfair. Sometimes the attacker does not enter through your door at all. They come through someone else's. This is the idea of the supply chain, and it is one of the most modern forms of vulnerability because no organization is truly alone. A company uses software from vendors, relies on managed service providers, updates tools automatically, connects partners into shared systems, and accepts trusted code as part of daily life. In 2020, the world learned this lesson through an event widely associated with SolarWinds. Attackers compromised a software update process, meaning that organizations that installed a trusted update could unknowingly bring an intruder inside. It was a quiet method, patient and strategic, not a smash and grab, but a long walk through the corridors of trust. And it revealed something profound about the connected age. Trust is efficient, but trust must be guarded. So defenders began to change the way they think about trusted software. They began to sign updates more carefully. They began to verify the integrity of code. They began to monitor not just for known malware, but for unusual behavior that might signal a hidden presence. And they began to build what is called a software bill of materials, a kind of ingredient list, so that organizations could know what components were inside the tools they depended on. This sounds like paperwork, and in a way it is, but it is also a form of calm clarity, knowing what you have, knowing what you rely on, knowing what needs attention first. Tonight, let it feel like tidying a pantry, labeling jars, checking expiration dates, making sure what you bring into your home is what it claims to be. Because in the digital world, a supply chain is simply the path by which tools arrive. And security is the habit of inspecting the path with patient care. When people think of the biggest cyber events, they often picture a single dramatic hack. But over the past 2 decades, some of the most impactful incidents have been less like lightning and more like weather. Data breaches, long, quiet leaks of personal information that spread outward in ways that are difficult to reverse. The story of this era includes events like the breach of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, often referred to as OPM, revealed in 2015, where sensitive personal data tied to government employees and security clearances was taken. It includes breaches like Yahoo, disclosed in stages beginning in 2016, where billions of accounts were affected, reminding the world that even giant familiar platforms can have deep, hidden cracks. It includes Equifax in 2017, where highly sensitive financial identity data was exposed, creating long shadows, because unlike a password, you cannot simply change parts of your identity. These events can sound heavy, but we can hold them gently. Their impact is not always immediate drama. It is the gradual inconvenience and risk that follows. Spam, fraud attempts, identity theft, and the quiet feeling of having your information floating somewhere beyond your control. They also changed how the world thinks about privacy. They brought stronger regulations in many places. They pushed companies to encrypt more. They encouraged better disclosure and better incident response, and more scrutiny of how data is stored and who can access it. And they taught everyday people a few simple habits that matter. Use two-factor authentication when you can. Watch financial accounts the way you watch the weather. Freeze credit when needed. Treat unexpected messages like strangers at the door and take a breath before opening. The deeper lesson is one you can rest with. The Internet has learned, slowly, that personal data is not a byproduct. It is a responsibility. And cybersecurity is not only about stopping criminals. It is also about honoring the quiet boundary between what is public and what is personal. In a moment, we will step into the newest chapter of this story, a chapter where automation becomes more powerful, language becomes easier to imitate, and artificial intelligence begins to shape both the attacks and the defenses. But we will enter it calmly, the way we enter any new room at night, with steady breath and a gentle light. The newest chapter in this story arrives quietly, as many big changes do. Artificial intelligence does not always announce itself with a trumpet. It slips into search boxes, keyboards, photo apps, and customer support chats. And soon it feels like it was always there. In cybersecurity, AI is simply a new kind of pattern finder. It can watch oceans of login attempts and network flows, and notice a rhythm that a human would miss, the way a night animal hears a twig snap inside a forest of wind. It can group alerts, reduce noise, and point a tired analyst toward the few signals that truly matter, like a lighthouse narrowing its beam to the right stretch of water. It can read long logs, summarize what changed, and suggest the next step, so the work becomes less like drowning in data and more like following a clear trail of footprints. It can also help defenders test their own systems. Teams can ask gently, what would an attacker try here, and use the answer to patch, to simplify, to close a door before someone else discovers it. But the same wind fills the sails of attackers, too. A phishing email can be written with smoother grammar, better tone, and the right cultural cues, as if it came from someone who truly knows you. A scam message can be tailored to your job title, your travel plans, your bank, your language, the small details that make a request feel ordinary. AI can help generate many versions of the same lure, changing wording again and again until one line slips past a filter and lands in a real inbox. And deep fakes, too, have entered the night. A familiar voice can be imitated, a familiar face can appear on a screen, and the old human instinct to trust what seems familiar can be gently pressed in the wrong direction. There is also a quieter place AI appears, inside the software itself. Developers now use AI to help write code, and that can be wonderful, but it can also repeat small mistakes at scale. So defenders use AI there too, scanning for weaknesses and reviewing changes. In this way, the same technology becomes both wind and anchor, and the best posture remains calm. Slow down when a request feels urgent. Confirm when a voice asks for something unusual. Let the extra step feel like a soft pause, not an inconvenience, because that pause is often where safety lives. When cybersecurity teams speak among themselves, they often sound less like warriors and more like gardeners. They talk about hygiene, which means the small habits that keep problems from taking root. They talk about visibility, which means being able to see what is happening before it becomes loud. And they talk about response, which means moving with practice calm when something unusual appears. One of the most important habits is patching. A patch is simply a repair, a tiny piece of code that closes a tiny opening, and when those openings are left unclosed, they multiply like unattended cracks in dry ground. Another habit is segmentation. Instead of one wide open network, systems are divided into zones so that a problem in one area cannot race through the whole house. A hospital might keep critical systems separate from public Wi-Fi, with extra checks at the inner doors. Then there is the quiet art of detection. Modern systems look for anomalies, the odd login from a strange place, the unusual spike in activity, the account that suddenly behaves differently, as if it has been borrowed by someone else. This is where AI can help, not as a magical shield, but as an attentive assistant that points at the unusual, the way a friend might say softly, "That doesn't look like you." And there is an equally important human habit: rehearsal. Teams run drills not because they expect disaster every day, but because calm comes from familiarity. They practice isolating machines, rotating credentials, restoring backups, and communicating clearly, so that when a real incident arrives, the first minutes are steady instead of frantic. All of this is supported by something simple and old-fashioned: lists, inventories of devices and software, like knowing which rooms exist in your house and which keys open which doors. Because you cannot protect what you cannot see, and you cannot repair what you do not know you have. Another quiet routine is identity management. Who has access? For how long? From which device? And with which level of permission? Accounts are created, adjusted, and removed like keys issued and collected, so that former keys do not keep opening doors. And behind the scenes, many organizations now use tools that spot suspicious behavior on a device, the odd process, the unusual file changes, the subtle signs of intrusion. When those tools whisper, humans investigate. The goal is to catch the spark early while it is still small. This is the gentle rhythm of modern defense: steady observation with quiet action when something drifts out of place. Tonight, let that feel reassuring. The Internet is not protected by a single wall. It is protected by many small routines, repeated across millions of machines by people who prefer boring success to dramatic rescue. Even with all this care, no system is perfectly silent forever. So the modern goal is not only prevention, it is resilience, the ability to return to steady life after a disturbance, like a city restoring its rhythm after a storm. Resilience begins with knowing what matters most. A hospital might name the systems that must remain available so care can continue even if paperwork slows. A bank might name the records that must never be altered so trust in numbers remains trust. A port might name the signals and schedules that keep cargo moving safely so the physical world does not stumble. And once those essentials are named, they are protected with extra layers, like valuables stored in the innermost room, not out in the hallway. Resilience also means reducing single points of failure, using multiple pathways so one broken link does not become a full stop, separating duties so one account cannot do everything alone, especially when money or safety is involved, ensuring that one stolen password cannot approve a large payment without a second confirmation, a second person, or a second device. It also means keeping clean restoration paths, backups that are tested, not just hoped for, spare systems that can be brought online, clear steps that turn chaos into a checklist. And resilience means telling the truth quickly when something happens. Calm timelines, honest updates, and plain language prevent confusion from becoming part of the damage. Many organizations also practice tabletop exercises, calm rehearsals, where people talk through a fictional incident as if it were real. Who calls the hospital leadership? Who contacts the bank's regulators? Who speaks to customers? Who restores systems? Who verifies that the restoration is clean? These rehearsals make the real thing less frightening, because the first time you walk the path is not in the dark. And resilience has another ingredient that sounds simple, but matters deeply. Time. The ability to endure a disruption without rushing into mistakes, to keep essential services running while repairs happen, to return to normal in measured steps. In a connected world, patience is a form of strength. This is why cybersecurity at its best is not an atmosphere of fear. It is an atmosphere of clarity. It is the steady practice of measuring risk, improving design, and accepting that preparedness is a form of kindness. Tonight, if your mind wanders into worry, bring it back to the simplest picture. A quiet house, doors that lock gently, lights that can come back on, and people who know what to do, not because they are anxious, but because they are ready. And now, as we near the end of our journey, we can turn the lens back toward you in the most comforting way, because cybersecurity is not only something large institutions do. It is also a few small habits that make modern life feel safer and simpler. You can think of them as bedtime rituals for the digital world. A longer passphrase that reads like a calm sentence, something you can remember without strain. Two-step verification that asks for a second nod before letting someone in, like checking the peephole before opening the door. Updates accepted when they arrive, like changing the batteries in a quiet clock before it stops. Backups that run in the background, so your memories are not held hostage by a single device. And a slow breath before clicking a link that feels urgent, asking yourself softly, does this make sense? It also helps to keep your digital life tidy. Fewer accounts you no longer use. Fewer apps with permission to read everything. A quick glance at settings now and then, the way you might check that a window is latched before a windy night. These habits are not about living suspiciously. They are about living with gentle boundaries. Just as you would not hand your house keys to a stranger, you do not hand your accounts to every message that sounds convincing. And just as you would keep a spare set of keys somewhere safe, you keep a recovery path if something goes wrong. If you ever receive a call that pressures you to act quickly, or a message that asks for codes, or a link that insists you must sign in immediately, let yourself move in the opposite direction. Take a breath. Go to the app directly instead of the link. Call the official number instead of the number in the message. The small act of stepping sideways often breaks the spell. And at home, there are gentle checks that help. Keeping your phone locked with a passcode. Updating your router now and then. Using separate passwords for email and banking because email is often the doorway to resetting everything else. These are not burdens. They are small comforts, like placing your keys in the same bowl each night. The modern world asks a lot of our attention, so it helps when security systems are designed to carry some of the burden for us. Browsers warn. Banks flag odd transactions. Phones encrypt by default. Passkeys replace memory with hardware, turning fragile secrets into sturdier locks. And slowly, year by year, the Internet learns to be less naive and more quietly trustworthy. Tonight, you do not need to hold every detail. You only need to feel that the night watch is real and that safety can be made from calm, repeated care. So we return to where we began, to the night outside your window. Somewhere, a plane glides along an invisible corridor of coordinates, guided by signals that arrive on time. Somewhere, a hospital shifts gently through its rounds, monitors blinking like slow fireflies, systems keeping careful track without asking for attention. Somewhere, a shipping lane carries containers across dark water, schedules updating in the background, customs messages moving quietly from port to port. Somewhere, a payment clears, a message arrives, a weather forecast refreshes, and 1,000 systems do their quiet work without asking you to notice. And threaded through all of it is the unseen practice we have been exploring. Not a single fortress, not a single hero, but a culture of care. People who patch and verify. Systems that check and log. Designs that limit harm when something slips through. And now, more and more, tools that can watch patterns at scale, helping humans focus their attention where it matters most. If there is one gentle truth to keep, it is this. The world does not stay stable by accident. It stays stable because countless small protections are maintained, the way a lighthouse is maintained, the way a bridge is inspected, the way a garden is watered. Listen for the deeper comfort underneath the facts. Most of the time, the systems around you work. They work because many people have chosen to be careful, and because the lessons of past incidents have been turned into better defaults, better tools, and better habits. So you can allow your own attention to loosen. The networks can do their quiet work, and you do not have to supervise them. You can rest in the older kind of safety now, the safety of still air, soft fabric, and a mind that is allowed to drift. Let your breathing become the simplest signal of all, slow and reliable, like a tide that knows exactly when to return. And as the last thoughts of the day pass, like small clouds, let them float away without holding on. The world keeps humming, protected by quiet routines, while you sink gently into sleep. Good night.